Okay, so I've titled today's presentation The Metaverse, the Start of a Million-Year Adventure, because I think if we get what we're doing right now in the 2020s, this could be an inflection point for the entire course of humanity. This could be a turning point for the next 10,000 plus years. So first, before I get into that, a little bit about myself. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Fantastic, thank you. Right, so there's my digital avatar. It's about as close as I've been able to get using the MetaHuman system so far to actually make it look like me. But that's a work in progress. So I consider myself a world builder and virtual reality designer. I'm also the co-founder of Axon Park, which is a metaverse education company. Our mission is to bring accessible, quality education to as many people across the world as possible over the next few decades. And before that, I have a background in architecture, so not computer science. I've been a world building and design nerd since I was a kid. And at some point during my career in architecture, I tried an Oculus Rift DK2, the second dev kit, the one with positional tracking. And it just changed my life completely. I knew that I had to be involved in the way we use this new technology to share virtual simulated space with people. I thought if we do it right, it could be really important. So let's get into it. I want to start, if we could go to the next slide, please. I want to start by telling you a story that starts back about as far as we can look in the course of human development. About 100,000 plus or so years ago with the development of spoken language. Now, this was a huge turning point for the species that would eventually become humanity, when we could sit around and communicate ideas and information and stories with other people. It was truly transformative, the ability to say something like, I need help. Here's who I am. Here's what I want to do. And then later things. Did you know about your grandfather? You never got to meet him, but here's how he was, etc., etc. The journey of communication has been something that we've been working on since the very start of time. And really, it's underpinned the entirety of development of civilization. Now, if we could hit the next slide, please. It took a little while. It's really been getting going recently, and we've been living to see it. But over the last 100,000 or so years, it took a while just to really figure out the basics. Now, this is some examples of some of the earliest art that we know of. There's an argument that it existed far earlier than this, but this is the earliest archaeological evidence of humans influencing their world to try and tell stories, impart ideas that would live longer than their own voices. Not only could you just pass on stories from generation to generation, but you could leave something in the world for others to find in the years to come. And that has been a piece of technology that has stayed with us for the last at least 40,000 years. Now, if we could hit the next slide again, please. Thank you. Over time, we got better at it. Now, shelter has been a huge component of human civilization since the early days. Over time, shelter evolved into architecture with a capital A. The importance of this is it's not just about building a roof over your head for practical reasons. In the buildings that we create, in the space that we craft around us, we embed ideas, expressions about who we are, who we want to be, and what we believe. It took us a good few thousand years to really get the hang of it, but by about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, we were starting to build structures that even today can be found and tell us something about our ancestors. This is important because, again, space now became a tool to communicate ideas about us. Next slide, please. I'll quickly jump onto this as well. This one's fairly straightforward. The written word. Again, the written word is at least, we think, 8,000 or so, give or take, years old. And again, it took some time to get going. Initially, very few people could read and write, and very few people had access to writing. But over time, we got better and better at distributing writing. Now, about a few hundred or so years ago, the printing press was invented. And with the printing press, all of a sudden, we could rapidly distribute information to people that previously wouldn't have had access to it. Over time, at least in the West and over other cultures, similar things have happened. We had experienced something called the Enlightenment. These days, you know, it's a name that's looked back on with some contention, but the rough idea was all of a sudden, by sharing information with as many people as possible, a huge range of people embraced ideas like science, reason, measurement, and the clarity and richness of communication to share things like technology and ambition grew massively. And then with that came entertainment, media, storytelling, history, and through it, a tremendous cultural exchange. Only a few hundred years ago, most people living on this planet wouldn't have known much about the country next to them, let alone the country on the other side of the world. But here we are right now, and I can guarantee that we're pretty much represented by every continent on the planet, with only a small group. Now that's fantastic. That is getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit. So if we could hit the next slide, please. Fantastic. Now let's see how some of these videos play. It might be a little choppy, but it should hopefully get the idea across. So there's obviously so much more to the advancement of humanity than just communication, information. There's been politics, there's been years and years of resource and technology development. But, oh, interesting, it crashed. That's fine. Okay, well, that gets fixed up. I'll just keep going. No worries, no worries. Yeah, this was maybe a little ambitious. We'll see. But the point is, as we've learned how to do this more richly, the pace of development of our world has rapidly increased. If you look back at the last 200 years, even 2 or 3 generations back, the world that our grandparents and great-grandparents lived in is almost unrecognizable compared to the world today. You go back a couple of hundred years even further, and it's the exact same thing. The world has changed so much. Previously, it took 1,000 years to reach a new epoch. Now it takes maybe a generation. So we're kind of coming up to a critical inflection point. I'm not going to use the word singularity because that is a separate concept that's more related to machine intelligence. But even outside of the idea of machine intelligence, we're reaching a point where our technology is transforming our world so much that it's almost impossible to predict what it might look like 50, 100 years from now. And I think that's the point where we will need to get the slides back if possible.
There's some technical difficulties. I'm sorry. I'm trying to.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No worries. It happens.
Then it crashed, so you just have to carry on while I try and fix it.
No worries. Okay. What I'm going to do then is just double check my slides. Give me 1 sec. Yeah, that's all good. All right, it'll come back in just a sec. But in effect, I've kind of been leading into something, haven't I? And that is the development of digital communication. That's the development of computers and subsequently the internet. Now, it was only around 60 or 70 years ago when the idea of computing was just starting to get adopted, when you could only have access to one if you were one of the top scientific researchers in the world at specific institutions or particular businesses like IBM. And it's only taken 2 or so generations for that to change. The next step after that was to make computers cheaper and more accessible and to bring them in the home with early PCs, early Macs. And then over time, they got smaller and smaller. This century, I think the big one so far has been smartphones, being able to put them in our pocket. And that's been incredible. That's been useful. But I think what we've done with them so far has been the really big thing. And that is connecting them together. How are we doing with that presentation?
It's not looking good. Sorry about that. Somehow my Edge browser crashed and lost the extension. So it's not coming back. Sorry. Wow. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I could maybe share it from my screen. Well, oh, Edge. No, I don't have that extension. Uh-oh.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I can freestyle this if we need to.
Oh, so the problem is the Edge tool crashed, Nick?
It crashed and lost the extension, so I have to look for the extension and reinstall the extension. So the web presenter is totally gone. Never had this before.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
It's Edge. It's Microsoft Edge.
All right. So let me think. Oh, yeah. If you freestyle it for I don't know, like 10 minutes, I can try to do something with the slides. I'll need to be on my computer, but
Yeah, of course. No worries.
yeah.
Okay, well,
Okay,
while
I'll
we
be back
figure
in
that
10
one
minutes then.
out, that's all good. No worries. Well, while we figure that one out, what we can do is, just maybe open the floor up to a few early questions. Where I was going to take this is basically laying the groundwork that communication has been the thing that's driven humanity. And we're now in the first 5 or so years of getting to the point where it might completely transform again whilst we're all alive. But yeah, no, I haven't really had too much of a chance so far to join the Metaverse Exploring group. My co-founder Taylor and I have been pretty busy in building our own platform at the moment. Firstly, it's really nice to meet everyone. But while I double check my slides, if anyone has any questions, I'd be very happy to address them.
You can raise your emoji hand like this, and I'll give you a megaphone.
Sweet.
Do you have a question? Okay, looks like Targavision has a question. Let me give you a megaphone.
Can I talk? Is it fine?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Welcome. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for. No worries about the technical difficulties. We can. I have some time, so that's fine. I was wondering. Do you think the metaverse? Everyone is talking about it right now, and we're on the verge of making it big, I guess. But do you think technology or the content is what needs to be developed first? What do you think about that? Like, do you think people or the technology will follow after the content, or do you think the technology needs to be developed first before we get mass adaptation and the content will follow? That's your view.
Great question. I think they kind of do this, don't they? They boost each other. Sometimes someone has an idea and they have to develop a little bit more technology to make that idea happen. Other times there are a bunch of inspired creators and they build some awesome content, which triggers investment to a new platform to enable even better content. And they kind of leapfrog each other like this, over time. So I think in terms of, are we at the point now where technologically we can reach, the kind of big metaverse with a capital M? It really depends on what you think of as the big metaverse. We're kind of at this point right now where the idea of metaverses is being talked about a lot, but arguably, you could look back. Sorry? Ah, sweet. Great. Okay. Yeah, I'll just quickly say, yeah, I think we can basically approach a really good standard of metaverse now. But if we think about the long-term vision of what metaverses might become, we've got a lot of tech building to do, as I can get into. Right. Are we all cool if I resume?
Yep. Oh, cool. Sorry, got it back up.
Amazing. Thank you so much for fixing that. Really appreciate. Okay. So I basically covered this slide. So if we could go to the next slide. Fantastic. So yeah, this was just an illustration of how far computers have come in such a short amount of time. Nick, if you could mute your microphone, that'd be great. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So it's really only taken a couple of decades to get to, initially where so few people could access computers to the point where they are in our pockets. But connecting them up has been the big thing. Now, if we could hit the next slide. If it's going to work. Don't crash. Ah, beautiful. Okay, lovely. But for me, I think the most exciting development of the last 25 or 30 years in my line of work has been virtual simulated worlds. The ability, either at runtime or with offline rendering, to simulate 3D space, move a virtual camera through it, allow people to interact with code inside it to simulate things like stories, meet other people. This has been the thing that I think has really transformed the way we can share stories. Now, we've been building tools to communicate ideas over the last few millennia. Written word is a great example. But up until this point, space was something that we couldn't really that clearly communicate. Space was something that existed in our baseline physical reality. And then beyond that, you could paint it, you could describe it verbally in writing. You could make films about it, but you couldn't necessarily move through it, explore it in a freestyle manner the way that you can in the real world until simulated worlds came along. And it's been amazing. It's been really fantastic, but it has had, in my opinion, if we're talking about where this technology could go, a few limitations so far. So if we could hit the next slide. Every slide that comes now, I'm going to be, praying we don't crash. Nice, awesome. Okay, so this is really just a short piece of footage to illustrate the idea that so far everything we've consumed in terms of information has had some level of abstraction between us and the information. Whether it's been a book that we've had to imagine in our heads, which can be incredible, but is still definitely not an interactive world. Whether it's been watching something on a screen, whether it's been hearing about something, it's always been at least one layer away from us. Which is okay, but if we're talking about clarity of communication, of building worlds to share with other people, it's never going to have as much immersive power as baseline reality. But it's now starting to change. So, again, if we hit next slide, that would be amazing. Sweet, thank you. And obviously, I've been leading up to virtual reality. Now, I'm just going to play some vignettes of stuff that I've built over the last couple of years as I talk, but that'll be relatively quick. VR has been absolutely huge. For me personally, it was enough to draw me from a career in architecture, building infrastructure in the physical world into virtual space, because I thought the potential for what we could do with this technology when we get it right, when we develop it down the line, would fundamentally transform the way humans share content with each other. And then hopefully beyond that, fundamentally transform the kinds of technology and the opportunities that people have access to. So this is just showcasing some PC VR stuff. Again, this is all technology that we've built inside Unreal Engine, some of our own VR classes, but it's a really fantastic platform. This is PC grade, not Quest grade, but you really can get a lot out of the platform when you spend a bit of time modeling nice environments, building nice mechanical moments. So at some point as a project, this will release. I think at this point, we're probably going to wait for virtual reality mobile to catch up by a few years because we want to distribute it properly, but it will be a lot of fun. Anyway, I can show you more of that later if you want, but for now, should we hit next slide? Thank you. So this has all been leading up to the big question. What happens when you connect up virtual worlds? Now, arguably, we've been doing this for the last 20, 25 plus years. There have been some really big examples. I think the one that I'll draw everyone's attention to is World of Warcraft, that we could probably retroactively argue might fulfill a lot of the criteria of a metaverse. Same with projects like Fortnite. Now, it depends on what you think of a metaverse as being. Is a metaverse just a virtual world that is networked up, that's big enough, that's hit some kind of critical mass that allows people to build a sense of community and culture that is purely centered around that space? Or is a metaverse something else? It really depends on individual definitions. Some people say it's as simple as a platform that supports networked spatial computing, like virtual reality, or like a flat screen game. Some people say that it is all about the idea of building worlds that extend the functionality and opportunities that our baseline reality might be able to provide. I think the answer is perhaps long-term, even more ambitious than that, but for now, the definition's flexible. If you like VR, build a space in it, call it a metaverse if you want, and then over time it'll evolve. But I think these are some really standout examples. Obviously, top left, alt space, although that's using a much older avatar system. I far prefer these avatars. Obviously, we've got VR chat there, we've got Rec Room, and then the big daddy, Fortnite, which I think, again, for the sheer critical mass of people, you could argue it's maybe a type of metaverse. They certainly like to say it is. Next slide, please. I think as well, a lot of people are wondering, is the metaverse going somewhere more than this? There's been a huge amount of investment in the space recently. There's been a lot of controversy around Meta, both initially for pivoting to be a company that is about metaverses, and then subsequently for posting some huge losses due to their R&D budget. But their vision is quite clear. Their vision is that network spatial computing is going to be here to stay, and is going to be a huge part of people's lives in the future. And for anyone in this room, for anyone that's even remotely involved in building and envisioning what this technology could do for people, I think that's really, really exciting. regardless of whether or not you agree with their exact vision, I'm almost not worried because that will evolve over time. Other companies will get involved in the space. In my opinion, the more the merrier, because there's a lot of good that this tech could do if we allow it to build out a little bit. Let's jump on one more. Thank you. So my thesis beyond all of this is that I don't think this is just a new type of internet. I think this is potentially something more. Since the beginnings of human history, we've been trying to figure out how to communicate with each other more efficiently, more clearly, send more information, send richer information. And when we get it right, we bridge cultures that previously might not have understood each other properly. There's a lot to worry about in the year 2022. I think that much is clear. But apart from that, if you look at the last 200, 300 years, we've really come to understand each other. We've got a long, long way to go. But I hope our technology will help us get to that next point. So I think that if we get this right, metaverses could potentially be a communication tool that allows us to build non-physical bridges between ourselves, similarly to the internet, but using much more space-focused infrastructure for the next century plus. And then I think it's going to go beyond there as well. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I'll touch on a few points I think are really important that the metaverse will do for people. The big one for me, as someone with a background in architecture, is spatial agency. Now, in the real world, I think everyone in here will have experienced the fact that property is getting more and more expensive, and the gap between how much people earn and how much a baseline apartment costs is starting to get insane. Less and less people in our world have the power to call the shots over the environments that they're in. And that is worrying, because shaping shelter is a fundamental part of, well, not only protecting yourself, looking after yourself, but the ability to self-actualize, to achieve as a human. So virtual reality and building virtual worlds is not going to replace that. Our real world's not going anywhere. But what my hope is that it will show people that it is to be expected, that you should want and demand to have control over the environment that you're in a more engaging way than we do in most cities that are controlled by a small number of people. And my hope is that will feed back into a better quality of conversation in the real world. How do we access space more as a culture? How do we ensure that people have adequate quality of shelter? How do we make sure the things we build are nice for people and not just for maximized profit for, again, 4 or 5 large companies in the United Kingdom, for example? We've talked about already better connection between cultures. Anything that allows you to build bridges and understand new kinds of people is, in my book, awesome. And then the big one, again, is more immersive and more, in general, digital infrastructure. I'll get to that a bit more in general, but right now, the cost of access to real infrastructure, a great example that I'll touch on in a second, education, is increasing every year. It's getting more and more expensive to access certain kinds of things. And with virtual reality, you can really reduce the cost to give people access to these tools. How far is this going to go? Where does the metaverse end? So in my opinion, this is the first incarnation of something that humans will carry with themselves for the next 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, even several million years. It won't necessarily be called the metaverse. It won't necessarily be called, whatever, the internet, something that you keep in your pocket. But it will be an understanding that our stories and the information that we create is just as real as our baseline reality, and that we can carry it with us and share it with others wherever we go. So I think ultimately the metaverse will evolve into a huge layer of other realities that humans can choose to inhabit over time, as well as our baseline reality. Let's hit the next one. So I don't want to go over time, so I'll try to be quick. I know we had a small delay in the middle, but at the moment, we're at this point now where we're trying to figure out what we're building still. There's so much left to make. There is so many basic infrastructural, technological, even just design questions that we still need to solve, that even the biggest companies involved in the space haven't yet solved. So how do you get involved? How do you build projects in the metaverse at the moment? There are 2 kind of guidelines that I work with, and I like to employ them both typically. The first is classic. It's how you approach video games. You make somewhere that people want to go. For example, in video games, it might be a great fantasy world. You build something that people want to do. Save that fantasy world. Classic, simple, tried and tested. The other is the more tech startup approach, which has a bit more utility in the real world, which is you try to find a way to use this technology to radically transform something that is worrying society or that they're struggling to do. And ideally, because Metaverse is a space-based, you probably want to do a little bit of both. Now, let's jump to the next slide, please. That leads us nicely to what I'm involved in. Hopefully there's something we can show more of in the next few months. But in general, right now, myself along with my co-founder Taylor Freeman and a team that we're building are building a metaverse for education. We call it Axon Park, and the general idea behind it is that in the coming decades, we want to provide really good quality learning to every single person on the planet that wants to learn, regardless of whether or not they come from a country with a lot of real infrastructure or whether they come from a part of the world that can't really afford to build schools. We believe that it should be a fundamental right that every single person should be able to learn the things they want to learn without having to bankrupt or put themselves into debt to do it. So we think the metaverse is a fantastic way to connect the best professors and lecturers to great students around the world, whilst significantly reducing the cost of infrastructure to build the platform for people to do that. Let's jump to next. So this is a kind of platform that is a work in progress. I just took a few of these screenshots this morning from the source control build. But effectively right now we're doing three things. We're building a virtual campus, which is a network of worlds that are some for institutions and some accessible to everyone. And it's basically in the exact same way as a physical university campus. One of the most fun things about studying isn't being in the classroom and learning. It's all the rest. It's engaging with friends. It's exploring beautiful spaces. It's chilling out in the sunshine. And when you are learning from home at the moment, remotely, using a laptop, you don't get any of that. It can become quite oppressive very, very quickly. So the baseline of what we do means that we have to make any kind of digital education experience spatially rich just to justify people spending time in it, to make sure that they're enjoying themselves. So we're building a platform, we're building worlds, and we're also building specific learning tools to help make actual learning more fun than just clicking through slides or reading a book or doing your homework. That's really the key. All of these kinds of tech, specifically information-based tech, is basically, I think, at its best when it can do things that the real world can't. A great example is in the real world, if you wanted to make, let's say, for example, a particular kind of learning insanely fun, you might have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to build a specific kind of installation or specific kind of platform to do it. In virtual reality, it is significantly cheaper. We're trying to get to the point where a professor on, let's say, a Tuesday evening, it's raining outside, and they've got a 9 a.m. lecture with their students. They want to make sure that attendance is good. So they spin up an Axon Park world, they fill it with engaging content that's all about learning, slightly gamified, but not entirely. And then tomorrow, they'll meet their students in the virtual space, and they'll go through it together. All the students will do a pre-recorded lecture. And we're doing it in such a way that it's fun and engaging, but in small increments to learn these kinds of things. So hopefully we'll be able to show more of this to the world in the next few months. It's a really, really enjoyable project. It's been great to work on so far. Definitely taking up the majority of our time, but it's been good, yeah. So anyway, these are just a few screenshots of it as we're going so far. If we could hit the next slide, please. There we go, a few more. One of a kind of concept diorama of the virtual campus. You can literally kind of aim at that and jump in it at the moment. There's an early hub space. Literally, this one was just insanely quick to make because I'd already modeled the space for research purposes, which is lovely if you're a world builder. But if you're not, you need to be able to do these things without first learning how to develop a game or design space. So having templates and presets is just as important as providing tools to power users. Anyway, next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, I'll just conclude with Axon Park that, again, we believe education needs to be a fundamental human right. In the future, no matter who you are on this planet, you need to be born knowing that through learning, you can have access to great opportunities and the dignity that they bring. Now, the United Nations says that it is a fundamental human right, which is fantastic because they agree. But the manifestation of that human right is not always ideal in a lot of countries, including developing countries. As one final quick example, here in the United Kingdom, I paid in total £1,800 to become a Master of Architecture for my master's degree. it's only been, I think, a decade or so, maybe less, since I did that. It's now 10 times that cost. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. It means that people that could be incredible at the thing they want to do might decide not to do it because they can no longer achieve it. So we need to reverse this. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of brilliant people, but it's worth it. So last things, let's move on to a final couple points, and then I'll take a few questions. So next slide, please. Fantastic. Okay. Final thing I'll say is right now, I think the immediate things we need to work on as a group, as a kind of community that are involved in building the metaverse is fairly straightforward. Things like easier access. At the moment, we're in a paradigm where the most high-quality virtual apps are distributed, or most good quality metaverses are distributed through applications, which is, in my opinion, fine for the short term. As a great example, AltSpace. I'm coming in from my Valve Index on my PC, and I downloaded the AltSpace app on Steam, and here I am. Marvelous. But if we're wanting to make this truly seamless, to make accessing worlds as easy as going to a website, we're going to need to do better eventually. Right now, having standardized protocols is really prohibitive in some ways because it means that so many apps, AltSpace, Axon Park, many others, might theoretically need to be refactored unless we can use the platforms we're building and slowly find how to handshake between platforms rather than all built to the same standard, like HTML, for example. That's one way. I think another really good candidate for making this easier is pixel streaming, because you could theoretically build 50,000 different apps, host them on the same server, and then hotlink the user between different apps so it's seamless for them. Easy. And then I'm sure the various handshake standards will come over time. But I think pixel streaming could be a great candidate. Server costs are prohibitive, but we'll see how it goes in the next 10 years. Who knows, maybe the RTX 5080 will be insanely powerful. Again, very simple, better UI, interfaces, rendering, we always want that. Unreal 5 is amazing. If anyone's watched my YouTube channel, you know that I am continuously on the ball about getting Epic Games to support Nanite for virtual reality. It won't really benefit Quest yet, but for high-end prototype next-gen experiences, Nanite could be one of the things that makes the metaverse really grow in scope, I hope. And then again, the big one, lots of different people and projects. It's easy enough for a lot of software developers, for virtual reality devs, for designers to say, cool, I want to build some awesome worlds. But the thing about the internet, for me, was that it wasn't just useful for the nerds, the early adopters. It became useful for everyone, regardless of what industry or skill set you specialize in. So what I'm hoping to see over the next decade plus is metaverse-focused projects from so many different angles coming in, figuring out how to build, figuring out how to do something amazing that the rest of us wouldn't have even seen coming. I can't wait for that. So basically, my advice there is to get involved. And then obviously the big one, time. What we're building is arguably as, if not more complex than the internet was, and we're still in the year 1997, if that. So really, we just need to keep building, and this tech will take time. But when it does, I think it's going to start to really, just like the internet, all of a sudden, we'll just see the numbers of people using it increase and increase and increase. And the articles that currently say, is the metaverse a fad controlled by Meta, blah, 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 will transition to, it is now impossible to do anything that isn't on the metaverse, which is equally hypey and equally probably divorced from reality. The reality will be somewhere in between, but I can't wait to see this kind of technology evolve over the coming decades. I've met some incredible people doing some incredible things. I'm sure all of you have as well, and I can't wait to see what they make. So final things, let's jump on. Yeah, this was just to basically illustrate the idea of having metaverses network and connect up over time. I don't think that there's going to be one metaverse. I think just like the internet, there's going to be a gigantic, varied ecosystem of virtual worlds. Maybe there'll be some standards that a lot of them meet over time. I think there will. And I think realistically, it won't be like HTML, where it's a code base everyone shares. It'll probably be engine-led. Unreal will have a metaverse standard. Unity will have a metaverse standard, etc. But I think over time, more as those standards come into play and as more projects come, the connections are going to come, and we're going to start to think of this as more than just a few apps. Next, if possible. Great. Okay. And this takes us back to, well, the beginning. In my opinion, so much of what humans have been doing is trying to figure out how to share who they are. Now, at the earliest days of time, all that would have been sitting around at a campfire, discussing with friends, family, kinspeople after a long day. And it's evolved over time. But the simplicity of this has never left us. And now, my hope is that we can take this campfire with us wherever we go. Initially, it'll be digitally or through headsets, but over time, maybe the interfaces will become more and more connected with who we are. And 10,000 years from now, I don't think people will think of reality as being only physical. I think there will be a much closer relationship between the content that we create, the worlds that we build, and our baseline reality. And I think we're seeing the first few decades of this happen right now. And you're all involved in it. If only we could see where this goes. It'd be incredible. Now, final couple slides. I'll breeze through them. Yeah, simple. If you're not involved yet in making something, get Unreal Engine 5, get Unity. There are so many other engines as well, even something as simple as Mozilla Hubs, just to prototype stuff. And final slide. Start making. It's where we all started. I was an architect. I didn't know how to use Unreal. I barely knew anything about programming. I knew it was important to me, so I took the time to learn. And I believe that everyone else can as well. So yeah, I can't wait to see what all of you make. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Alistair. It was a great presentation. I think there were some questions from the audience. I think I saw Johan who raised his hand. Maybe we should give the audience opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah, very happy to do that.
So if you want to ask a question, you can click on the emoji to the left below the screen, and then click on the hand.
Sweet. Okay, like we've got one from Mihai. How's it going?
Okay, 1 second. I'll put you on the mic.
No worries.
Okay. Yes, you're on the mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, how's it going?
Great, it's going very well, thank you.
Glad to hear.
So you've talked a bunch about virtual worlds, and I was just wondering, like, how do you see virtual worlds evolving, and how do you see virtual worlds, I don't know, let's say in 2050, so around 30 years from now. So what features that are currently not present do you think these virtual worlds will have?
Fantastic question. So I would say right now we're limited mostly by things like file size and rendering. We would probably in virtual reality build much larger in scope virtual worlds than we currently do. So I think one of the easiest ones to say is larger scoped worlds. People are talking a lot at the moment about having great big overworlds that multiple people can develop projects in. And there are a few examples of that. They work okay. And yes, some of them may be tied to virtual land speculation, which isn't my area of expertise or advocacy necessarily. But the principle of having multiple hosted projects in one persistent space is very interesting. So for me, I think the easy answer to that is as tools to build these worlds evolve, as things like Blender, 3ds Max, Maya, and a whole suite of other really easy to use tools to help people build spaces come online, and as the tech to render much larger spaces comes online, we'll see much bigger worlds. That's the easy answer. I think there's another component to the answer as well, where at the moment, there's a lot of things that we'd love to do in the real world that are prohibitively expensive. Build more incredible stadiums, build more incredible civic spaces, do things that we could never do in the real world, like say, for example, break the speed of light, unless you think we can, I don't know. So I think if you've ever heard of the term, a kind of singularity effect, some people say black swan effect, but it's the idea that we can't necessarily predict exactly how the technology will transform what we build. I think there's an element where some of the virtual spaces we might see in the coming decades are so surprising to us that it's hard to see them coming. But I think in order to do that, we have to support more people being able to easily make worlds and more rendering and performance for the worlds we inhabit. In some respect, it's almost a good thing we don't have that yet, because as an industry, we're still figuring out the basics right now. You know, you don't want to walk before you can run. Otherwise, you'll be working for 30 years on a project you'll never release. So I think in some respects, it's probably okay that that will come online over time. But scope is the easiest answer for me, I'd say. Thank you very much for the great question.
Thanks for the answer.
Anyone else got anything?
I think Johan had a question. I'll give you
Sure.
the mic, Johan.
Sorry, I pushed the button by coincidence, so I'm okay. Thank you.
No question?
All good?
No question, sorry.
Okay.
No worries.
No problem. Are there any other questions for Alistair? Okay, I'll give Targavision the mic. 1 sec.
Sure.
Yeah, you're on the megaphone.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Alistair. Really,
Most welcome.
really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if it's a question per se. I was just thinking, you were talking about cost of education is rising,
Yes.
and also cost of living is rising.
Yes.
I would maybe argue differently. I think cost of education actually went down with the internet. Like nowadays, it's super easy to get knowledge, to educate yourself. Like you did yourself until 5. I don't just spend 1,000 pounds or euros or whatever to educate yourself in that field. So I think actually cost of education, and also with your Axon project, is going down, but all the rest is going up, but it sort of balances it out again, I guess.
Yeah, that's a really great point and a great question. Yeah, I think I do agree with you. One of the biggest things about the internet has been access to information for people. And obviously, say for example, when I was first learning Blender as the first thing I learned in, I think around 2006, 2007, there wasn't very much information that me as a teenager could understand on how to pick up the tools and learn the cadences and logics and syntaxes of 3D modeling. But now, a decade and a half plus later, there are literally 1,000 YouTube tutorials being made on a daily basis. So, and as a result, we've seen so many industries grow, you know, especially as you said, in parts of the world where there aren't formal education institutions. You can still learn some incredible internationally in-demand skill sets. And 30, 40 years ago, you couldn't. And that's really helped a lot of economies start to grow. So yeah, I completely agree with you in that respect. Education has become more accessible. I think the other flip side is, of course, that formal education, as we think of it today, things like universities, have become measurably more expensive. I think since it was the 70s or 80s, it is 4 times more expensive relative to income. And that is where things get difficult, because there are still certain skill sets you can't really learn on the internet. For example, a very close friend of mine that works at Microsoft is involved in lasers, and I think maybe some very advanced computing she'll never tell me about, as much as I beg. But she wouldn't have been able to pick up that skill set on the internet. And so I think if we're going to, as a civilization, truly be prepared for the next century plus, we need to make sure that access to really specific high quality kinds of information is just as affordable as the stuff that's easy to make a tutorial on. And that's where the gap is at the moment. And that's the gap I think we can hopefully bridge over time. It's also not about replacing professors or academics, because they've worked so hard to be amazing at what they do, but it's finding great ways to connect them, the students, without making it prohibitively expensive for the students. Yes, I saw another question in the audience. I think it is, hello, how do I give you a mic? I doesn't think I've got that option. Daniel, could
I'll
you
give
give,
him a
I think
mic.
it,
Yeah,
Give him nicely.
a nice early, yeah.
Let me see. Yeah,
I can hear you.
you're on
What's
the
up?
mic. You're on the mic.
Thank you. Okay, finally. Yes, I thought I came in. Unfortunately, I came in toward the end of the talks. So if you've already covered this, just stop me. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about I mean, there's certain things in VR that are a bit frustrating that
Mhm.
because one person's had a problem that you constantly have to turn off a bubble. That's the case in alt space now. And just wanted you to talk a little bit about features and layers of just like that you can have no blinders or extreme blinders if you get motion sickness. You also have this bubble that I go into worlds and have to constantly turn it off. And it's mostly for new people. I've been in VR for 5+ years. So like for me, it's just not a feature that I'm interested in. So I'm constantly having to turn it off. And then another
Great question.
thing I wanted you to address is, if you would, is there's been some research and development around realistic avatars. What about those of us who don't share our real names? We have a nick, and everyone knows us by the nick. No one in alt space knows my real name. I prefer it that way. I prefer not to have a realistic avatar. In fact, I'm still angry about the robots, that they got rid of the robots. So, I mean, if you can talk around those two things, I would appreciate that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, firstly, I didn't cover them earlier. Great questions. And yeah, let's begin with the bubbles. I mean, so personally, similar to you, I've been in VR since the relatively early days. And for me, my transformative benchmark experience is still Boneworks. So I love getting stuck in. I love the smooth movement. I love being able to jump off things and throw things around and all the rest. So I definitely understand, obviously, because my co-founder and I are building a platform, you have to make sure that it's accessible to people that are in for the first time. But you also have to make sure it isn't irritating for power users. And for me, the sweet spot is in persistent settings. Say, for example, right here, there's a bubble option. I might turn off the bubble option in persistent settings and be able to leave it off, and you just prompt people when they first make an account. Do you want this feature or not? You can change it at any time. That's one way of doing it. No, I'm sure there's a really great reason in AltSpace that they've got it there. It could be something with the effect that people under the age of 18 are having their personal space invaded, VR chat style maybe, or allegedly VR chat style, I guess. So maybe that's why they've been so kind of prescriptive about this particular setting. And maybe the answer is more design focused, where if you have the bubble on, other people fade out as they come near to you, as opposed to other people cannot move into your space. So it's a design thing, in my opinion. I can see it from both sides, but I agree as a power user, I like to make sure that things are super seamless and straightforward. And to your other point, that's a really, really great question. So I've heard the metaverse described to me, and I don't know if it's entirely this, but I've heard the metaverse described to me as being a search to help people express their identity more clearly. And I think it is a huge component, but that doesn't necessarily need to be the identity you have in the real world. There's an incredible opportunity to be who you want to be. I think there are probably some benchmarks which are set down, for example, age-related. We don't want to make this a space to make it easy to be a predator, for example. I think that should be a given. We need to make sure we protect vulnerable people. But at the same time, for example, my co-founder Taylor and I in VR chat once ran into someone who found it difficult to move through the real world in a social manner, but absolutely loved VR chat because they could be who they chose to be and express themselves in the way that they wanted to be. And they made full use of the accessibility tools as well. And that was incredible for me. As well, of course, there's a lot of biases you have in the real world, unfortunately, that humanity has inherited, that we're slowly, as an international community, working incredibly hard to remove from our manners of thinking and manners of legislation. But we have such a lot of work to do in it. And I think there could be a huge opportunity in virtual reality to really challenge a lot of the biases that so many people have. For example, Taylor and I, again, my co-founder, we're looking at the moment of having in certain team-based scenarios an anonymous mode, where you don't know who the other people you're working with are, even if you knew their avatars a minute ago. So you're not judging your team based on who you think they are. You're judging them based on the work they're doing, and you're communicating to them in a more clear manner, we hope. And then at the end, maybe you toggle avatars back on and reflect that. So yeah, no, to answer your question, I think in most cases, there's a real argument for being able to express yourself in the way that you want to express yourself. I guess if, for example, you were in a school system, maybe there's a deep buried layer of data somewhere that does know your real identity. I don't know, that's very use case specific. But in general, yeah, why be hard-edged about it? Why be draconian about it and say, it has to look like you? I think that's crazy.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm by the way, in real life, I'm solid pink. But other
Amazing.
It's a good answer. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That was great.
Thank you so much for the great question. Really appreciate it. I saw another couple of hands raised again. So if anyone else has a question, I'd be very happy to answer.
Yeah, raise your hand if you have a question for us there.
Yo,
Yeah, 1 second.
there's Johan.
Yes.
This time I have a question. Alistair, last year, Meta announced their Metaverse, and Microsoft announced their part of it. And what's the current status of all this? When I talked with potential client about it, it's quite confusing. So can you shed some light on that? What the status is of all the initiatives?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways of thinking about this, in my opinion. So obviously, technology like this, here's a great example, is every big AAA video game in the last 5 years has announced a release date and then delayed, and then delayed. Whether it was Cyberpunk, whether it's Starfield, the new game from Bethesda, which has just recently had a delay announced. If anyone's been following that crazy-looking Harry Potter game, I bet you it's going to be delayed before Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. And that's because these kinds of things take a huge amount of time to develop, and there's a continuous tension between the developers who want to have the time to do it properly and the business side of things who need to get it out the door. And sometimes you come to the reality that it's not done yet and we can't ship this. Therefore, you push the deadline back, which is what we're seeing a lot in the AAA space. But at the moment, Meta, Microsoft, and so many others announcing that they're involved in the metaverse, it's like staking a flag in the sand and saying, we are here, we're in the space. We're absolutely by no means ready to show you what we've got because we're still building it, but you need to know we're involved because in 5 years, that's going to be important. So the status of it is, I think, project varied. Horizons looks interesting. I don't think it's finished by any means, but it looks kind of cool. Epic's probably working on some crazy stuff, I bet, but they'll announce it when it's ready and it'll be Fortnite connected. It would be my guess. I don't know that for sure. I mean, Microsoft has AltSpace, don't they? So I guess that's one layer. But if they're doing anything else, yeah, they're probably doing it for valuation reasons or for, again, just saying we're involved. We are a cutting edge company and we're building the latest tech. But it really depends project to project, whether or not they have a clear vision that they're working towards behind the scenes, or whether they're just trying to make sure that their name is in the discussion. It depends. So ultimately, I wouldn't promise your clients any particular platform. I would just talk about the tech, show them what's available at the moment, things like this, and say, yeah, all these other people are involved. It's a continuously moving space. And over time, hopefully more and more stuff will come online. But don't pin yourself to promised platforms just yet would be my thing.
Yeah, and as a side note to that, Johan, if you're interested, and also other people here to keep updated on the state of the metaverse, well, we've got like a show on Friday. It's called State of the Metaverse. Every Friday we have like a video, and it's also a podcast with with guests, like CEOs and other creators, and ask them like, how far are we with the technology, and what are the latest updates in the space, basically. So yeah, would love to have Alistair also on that, but yeah, we'll talk after the session, Alistair.
yeah, we'd love to sometime, absolutely.
Cool.
I saw a question there from Axon Park, the purple dude, which is straight up Taylor, I'm assuming, unless his account's been hacked. How's it going?
Hello there.
How you doing?
I was giving some emotes to the question. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions that are being asked here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Any more questions before the hour closes out? Yes, we've got one there. Oh, couple. Yes.
Do we want to do a selfie before it ends also? And then Targa Vision has a question.
Yeah, I saw a couple. One from Melos as well. Melos. Sorry if I pronounced the name wrong. You can correct me in a moment. Yeah, sure. I can hang around after a few minutes as well, but if you guys need to get on elsewhere, no pressure either way, but I can stay back.
Yeah, I had a question.
Cool.
Like, I just started with Unity, and I have a question like where to start. What's the best start? Where can I find the best like introduction videos or something like that? Because I think it's really interesting to build stuff, and I just want to get into it.
Amazing question. So I'll preface this by saying that I'm more experienced with Unreal Engine, but I went through a similar journey in Unreal. So what I found in the Unreal case was there was a huge number of resources online that I could learn from, whether it was YouTubers who were talking about making virtual reality player classes, open source standards like the Unreal Unreal VR. It's basically called UE4 VR, and it's the VR expansion plugin, and it's a great place to start for people that want to learn about good principles for things like motion controller transforms, good quality collision capsules, etc., etc. And there was a huge body of content on the marketplace as well for things like VR classes. So my journey was opening Unreal, and this was a few years ago now, figuring out how to get things in, figuring out how to make player classes run, and then over time just continuous R&D and building up an understanding of the logics, cadences, good practices, etc. And it's the same in Unity. There are so many good VR projects that are built in Unity. I'm afraid I can't specifically point you to the resources because I've had less experience with it. But my guess would be there'll be some great YouTube videos of how to build a VR project in Unity, how to provision the renderer to run with whatever headset you've got, etc., etc. And then just start from there. Start small. Don't try to build Boneworks on day one. You know, that takes at least 50 million years. But yeah, it's very doable. It's very doable. So the other thing is don't give up too early because it will maybe be frustrating if you've not done it before, but it'll get more easy over time and you'll be surprised at the things you learn how to make.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, I just installed Vroid for VR chat and was making a character an avatar. And,
cool.
Yeah, I just set it in Unity, but I was like wondering what I could do more in Unity, but Vroid is not right? So yeah, that was kind of the question. Like, what can we do in Unity? What you can do in Vroid, for example?
Great question. In general, some of the best games made in Unity is really good examples of things like Boneworks, as an absolute kind of textbook example of a medium to small size development team building something truly exemplary. But before that, it's simple things like building worlds. And what are you going to put in it? Is it going to be trees? Is it going to be a building? What's the building going to look like? How are you going to build textures and shaders? If you're wanting to immediately get it inside virtual reality, it might be something like using VRChat's SDK to publish it to their cloud. And then there'll be a whole bunch of videos on building for VRChat somewhere. Same for AltSpace, I believe. Same for Rec Room, although I don't particularly know how Rec Room's SDK works. So yeah, it's really just a question of see what people have done. If you want to do VR chat, go exploring. Most of the worlds are user generated, you know, and then from there, make something small, see how it went, make something else. So yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one other question. Sorry, you're an architect, right?
Yeah.
Did you make like rooms and that kind of stuff for companies that they can show, that they can see how it looks like?
So today, not so much. The best place to see a lot of the stuff I've built is my YouTube channel. It's mostly virtuality based, but it shows a lot of the things I learned from architecture, making VR spaces. In fact, if you go to the next slide, please, Nick, I'll just talk over it. I won't narrate it or anything, but it's just a process of some of the stuff I've built over the years. Whenever ready, no rush, if Nick's there or not. Anyway, but yeah, basically.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I think Targa Vision had one question. Maybe that can be the last one. But
sure.
Should we do it now?
Yeah, I had one final question. Sorry for having another question. I was just wondering, myself, I'm a creative director in a creative agency, and we're really working on like brands and branding in the metaverse and see what's possible. And recently you have a lot of big brands like Spotify, Heineken doing stuff in the metaverse, Roblox or some other application. And for me, it feels more like they use it as a gimmick so they can make headlines with their into the metaverse, a bit like you explained with Microsoft and Meta themselves doing it.
Yes.
But I'm still wondering what your thoughts are on what can be the added value of the metaverse in terms of like branding or more and experience.
Oh, great question. It's such a wild, wild west in that respect, in some senses. I think two of my favorite examples of like questionable metaverse projects this year were, first, if you go through CES, there's some from earlier this year, there are some incredible articles just talking about the most flagrantly clickbaity, hilarious, inappropriate uses of the word metaverse that hundreds of different brands were trying to kind of connect themselves to, like the metaverse of keyboards or the metaverse of soft drinks or whatever else. And it was hilarious. Following that, there was also a huge food chain conglomerate in the US who I'm sure you guys know which one I'm talking about, but they did the metaverse for the shopping experience. And they literally just recreated it one-to-one. And I'm not entirely sure why. I think the same for a few fast food joints. So in that respect, it was, I mean, to be honest, it's a good thing. It's a fantastic thing because companies are asking the question, how can we use the metaverse to connect with people? And some of them will be hits, some of them will be misses. So I think at this stage of the industry for the next few years, exactly like it was in the early days of the internet, people will be trying things. Some will be awesome, some won't be. I think the key for me, for brands working in it, will be the utility is going to be engagement. It's going to be telling stories about the brands. It's not necessarily going to be one-to-one simulating their product or service or experience. For example, the one for a recent burger metaverse that someone did, as far as I know, it was just going in the metaverse. I would have much rather seen a crazy, crazy adventure of some description. That's just me. So yeah, I think that's going to be an evolving one. For now, it's probably just a case of seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. It's definitely early days. I think long-term, it's going to be a completely different business model to monetize the metaverse, and ads and content, that kind of thing, will evolve, I'd say.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Cool. I think that was the final official question. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate you guys all coming in. Thank you.